All right, folks, we are just about halfway through Module 3, which means it's time for a mid-Module 3 test, which means it's time for a mid-Module 3 review. So our Module 3 notes today, Module 3 notes. Module 3, this will be Lesson 7, so 3-7. Okay. We're going to do a mid-module review. 5, 6, 7 for our Roman numeral. Now, I'm hoping that this will go fairly quickly, but I don't know, I say that and it never works. We'll see, because there's a lot here that I don't really need to put on this paper. The important thing, see if I can get some more light on there. The important thing is that you have these notes already in your notebook. You also obviously have the videos to go back and look at if you need to. Okay. So, especially with Lesson 3-1, there's not a ton I'm going to put on this paper. Lesson 3-1 was all about equivalent fractions and fraction concept review. I'm just going to put concept review right here. The kinds of questions that you can expect to see on the test are going to be, I'll give you one fraction, I'll say that it's equal to something with blank numerator, find the numerator. I'll show you. Okay. If I give you something that looks like this, let's say 4/5 is equivalent to something over 25. Then you need to be able to look at this and say, well, 5 times what equals 25? 5 times 5. Okay. Then 4 times 5 will give me the answer. The answer will be 20. Or I may give you 4/5 and then a list of fractions. You have to find the one that's equivalent, that kind of thing. Make sure you are also clear on numerator and denominator, that you know what those words mean. Okay? That you know what those words mean. If you have been following along with the equivalent fractions we've been using for adding and subtracting, this should be pretty familiar. This should be pretty familiar. All right, like I said, not much. Let's look at Lesson 3-2. Okay. Lesson 3-2, we talked about common multiples, but again, specifically, least common multiples and denominators. And denominators. There we go. Okay. So least common multiples, least common denominators. When we're dealing with fractions, it ends up being the same thing most of the time. So if I give you two numbers like 4 and 6, we just list out the first 5 or 10 multiples of each. Remember, a multiple is just whatever that number is times 1, times 2, times 3, times 4, times 5, so on and so forth. So one group of 4, 2 groups of 4, 3 groups of 4, 4 groups of 4, 5 groups of 4, and so on and so on and so on. 1 group of 6, 2 groups of 6, 3 groups of 6, 4 groups of 6, 5 groups of 6, and so on and so on and so on. Now the least common multiple is the first thing that shows up in both rows. So in this case, we're looking at these two right here. Okay. Now, I've been circling them, so let's keep doing that. I want to make sure I'm not switching my methods at the last moment. Okay. 12 and 12. Some of you probably also recognizing if I had continued this list, 24 would have been the next one. I would have had another common multiple. Least common multiple is usually the most useful at least when we're dealing with fractions. So as soon as you see that first multiple, you can stop. There will be other times in math where you'll want other multiples, but this is not usually one of them. Moving right along. Okay. Lesson 3-3. I'm going to make sure there's not a ton of this on the test, but you will see at least one question. Okay. This was when we were adding fractions using models. Now you can do this for subtraction also, but I think by the time we got to subtraction, most of us had moved past the models. But again, I want you to have the visual, so you'll see at least one question like this. Okay. If I am adding something like 2/3 plus 3/4. So you know what, let's just make it 1/4. I want to make sure this doesn't get too big. Okay, there we are. So 2/3 plus 1/4. And I made a mess of that, so let me fix it. While I'm fixing that, you can start drawing the rectangles that you know are coming. We want them to try to be about the same as much as possible. Don't need perfection here, just make your best effort. Those are pretty bad. Okay, start with the vertical columns. Thirds, 1, 2, 3. Specifically, 2/3, so I'll shade in 2 of them. Plus 1/4, so I'll split this into fourths. 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'll color in one of them. With the bars, it's always hard to tell. It's hard for me, at least sometimes, to see that these are not all the same size piece, but they're not. Can't add them unless they are, so for my thirds, I'll use my partner to draw some rows. There's 4 rows. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll use this partner to draw some rows. 2, 3. Those lines are getting bad. Now I have changed both of these so that instead of being thirds, instead of being fourths, both of them are now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Both of them are 12ths. Now I just go ahead and add up the boxes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 are colored here. 9, 10, 11. 8 plus 3, 11. 11 twelfths. Okay. Most of the time you are going to be doing this without the models. You're going to be doing what we practiced, finding a common denominator, all that. For lesson 3-4, we talked about that. Let's look at it now. Lesson 3-4, we talked about adding fractions with unlike denominators. Running out of space again. Some big words with fractions. Adding fractions with unlike denominators. Okay. Now I already know the answer to this, so I'm going to use these exact same numbers to test it out. Okay. 2/3 plus 1/4. Now, mostly for time, mostly for space, I'm going to zip through this. Please remember to look back at your notes to see how we read it vertically, or wrote it vertically. Okay. These are the notes from before. Please remember to make sure you're copying it like this. That's really the best way to write it. Okay. 2/3 plus 1/4. If I list out the least common multiples for both of these, the LCM for both should be 12, which means I want to change each one into a fraction with a 12 denominator. So 2/3 is going to become something over 12. 1/4 is going to become something over 12. Going back to 3, 1. We got the least common denominator using what we did with 3, 2. And now we're going to prove what we did in 3, 3 with 3, 4. 2/3. 3 times 4 is 12. So 2 times 4 will be 8. 2/3 and 8/12 are equivalent. 4 times 3 is 12. So 1 times 3 is 3. 1 times 3, those are equivalent. 1/4 is equivalent to 3/12. And if you look at the model, that's what we have up here. 8/12, 3/12. Add them together. There's that 11/12 again. We get the same answer. Lesson 3-5, very, very similar. Lesson 3-5, very, very similar. This time we're subtracting fractions. Subtracting fractions with unlike denominators, that is. I keep using that, but remember that was some of our vocabulary as well. Unlike just means not the same. Unlike means not the same. Okay. Getting down near the edge of our page, and we're pushing that 15-minute mark. Like I told you, even when I think they're going to go quick, they never seem to. Subtracting fractions with unlike denominators. Okay. I could use those exact same numbers again. I think that might be too confusing though. So let's do 2/3 minus 2/5. Okay. 2/3 minus 2/5. Looking at the denominators, we need to find a common denominator, a common multiple of 3 and 5. The least common multiple for those two is actually just multiplying them together. It's 15. 2/3, well, 3 times 5 gets me 15. So 2 times 5 would be 10. That's 10/15. 2/5, again, something over 15. 5 times 3 gets to 15, so 2 times 3 would be 6. Okay. 10 minus 6 is 4. We do not subtract the denominator, just like we didn't subtract the denominator, or excuse me, we didn't add the denominator. Denominator is a label. It's a unit. It needs to stay the same. Okay. So, the answer for our subtraction problem, 4/15. I didn't box up our other ones. Should probably do that. Now, the only other thing we talked about in class, and there will not be much of this on the test, but I will include it here. For lesson 3-6, we did talk briefly about mixed numbers and improper fractions. We also talked about simplifying, which I will go over with you quite a bit in class. We'll keep talking about that. For mixed numbers and improper fractions, the big thing I'd like you to know is just how to go back and forth. You'll only have 1 or 2 questions on this on the test too. If you have 2 and 2/3, please remember that you are multiplying across the bottom. 3 times 2. This is a whole number. 2 whole candy bars, 2 whole pizzas, whatever we're talking about. Each one has 3 pieces, so 3 pieces in 2 wholes, 3 times 2 is 6. Then we add the little 2 that's left up here, so 3 times 2 is 6, plus 2 is 8, and it's just going to be the same denominator, 8/3. Now going the other way takes a little bit of division. Let's say I wanted to take 8/3 and turn it back into this. Okay, again, we already know what it should be, so hopefully, well, that's not fair. You guys want a different one. Let's do a different one. Let's do 13/5. There we go. Okay, this is an improper fraction, just like that one was. I want to turn this improper fraction into a mixed number. So what I'm going to do is take the numerator Make that our dividend. I have 13 little pieces. I am dividing by 5 because I'm trying to put them into groups of 5. The denominator tells us every group of 5 makes a complete whole, whether it's a set, a region, whatever. 5 goes into 1 no times. 5 goes into 13 about twice, because 2 times 5 is 10. 13 minus 10 is 3, so I have a remainder of 3. I didn't leave myself a whole lot of space, so I'm going to have to kind of squeeze it into the margin here. Our quotient at the top, that is our whole number, because that is the number of sets that we were able to make. The remainder is what's left. We have 3 little pieces that were not quite enough to make a set. The denominator is just the same as the divisor, the same as the denominator before. It was 5 before, so it's 5 now. So 13/5 is the same as saying, well, I have 2 complete sets of 5, a 5 and a 5, that's 10, and then I had 3 of the fifths left over. All right, I'm sorry that wasn't quite as short as I had hoped, but at least it's better than lesson 3.6 was. If you have any questions, make sure you bring them to class. We'll be working on a study guide and preparing for the mid-module 3 test, which is coming up soon. All right, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I will see you in class.